And we're live. It's Sunday, so today we're talking the American Revolution. This is part 2, and taxes. Fun. Everybody's favorite conversation, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's pretty much how it goes, isn't it? I mean, that everyone loves to talk about things. What's always going to be around? Death and taxes. You know. So
Not the British. I mean, what?
we'll worry about that a little bit later as we poke fun at our British comrades.
But I'm joined here by MC. I think Farty is MIA today. I saw him a little bit in Discord earlier, but I don't think he's feeling good. Farty, if you are out there, the link's in Discord. You know how to click it. MC, go ahead and are we going to go right into the Stamp Act, or are you going to talk a little bit about the build-up in Britain for?
Let's go on as to explain a little bit about what's been happening from this perspective. Right now, first of all, there's several things that you have to understand about the situation. Right, most people don't even realize the colonies and how they're viewed. All right, at least from the United States perspective, we look at the colonies all together as a set, as a colonies. All right, but the colonies were not like that. All right, the colonies each had an individual charter, each had an individual mandate, and from the different crown elements. Okay, some of them had it from King James. Some of the colonies, all right, had theirs from King Charles. All right, their mandates from King Charles. All right, some of them had it from basically Parliament in a way. All right, during the how do you say it? The unpleasantness of Cromwell, when you had no king, all right, over there, and so the end result is the new kings of England come from the Hanoverian line. They are actually more German, all right, in origin. All right. Now, what does that mean for the colonies? Well, from the colonies' perspective, it means that the king that is currently on the throne is not the king that they chartered from. All right. This isn't the people they chartered from. And remember, most of the colonies were chartered were from royal charters. So they.
Yeah, didn't some of them get their charter from the West India Company though? Like, didn't some companies charter trade towns?
Oh, sure. So some of them did. All right. So it's just pointing out that these are, but the charter still comes from the king. It's a royal charter. All right. It's not a parliamentary charter. Okay. So you get through the petitions to petition the king, and the king would issue the charter. Right, and it's kind of important to understand this because Parliament it has surrency now. All right, after the Cromwell Revolution, Parliament is in charge. Right, the king is the head of state, but he's not really the head of the government. Right, they're not really in control of the government in the same sense that it was prior to, the Cromwell Revolution, right?
Yeah, but he still had direct control over the colonies, what they would call the Commonwealth nowadays, right?
Well, no, then that's the point. Even though the charters were royal charters, the ones that are now in the position of managing the colonies is Parliament, because Parliament is in control.
And was the Prime Minister Lord North at this point, or was that just during the war?
I'm not sure if he was Lord North at this point or not. I haven't looked at it that closely when Lord North took over. But the thing why this is important. Well, this is important because Britain, we are 13 small little colonies, all right, and we're not the most important one. This is the other thing to remember. The U.S. colonies are not the most important colonies to Great Britain. The crown jewel is India. Okay? what do you have in America? What are they getting from America? They're getting certain raw goods, specifically wood, some material, things like that. But it's not tea, right?
Well,
it's not spices.
Yeah, and the thing is, though, the lumber and stuff that they were getting from the colonies weren't even going directly towards the United Kingdom itself. It was going to like Haiti to build houses. That way they had arable farmland for sugar production, right?
Well, that's one example, yes. Right. The colonies themselves are supplying some things to Britain that are important, but it's not the case that the United States is what it will be. Tobacco was a unique crop that they got. Yes, that's very true, Dash. Welcome, by the way. Yes, tobacco is one of the things that they were getting. They were getting certain raw goods because cotton production. They were getting some of that to feed their textile mills. It wasn't there that prominent yet. Rum. The reality about rum is you can kind of get rum anywhere. Now, this sounds kind of crazy, but rum is the staple of the Navy. Okay, all navies at this point, because, quite frankly, water is not too good. Okay, most people don't want to drink the water because the water tends to be contaminated with disease. So most people drink watered down rum for the most part. Well, what people would consider watered down rum. So I'm just trying to get a background so that you can understand what's happened. So you have what's known as the French and Indian Wars. Okay, where the British spent a lot of money sending troops to the Americas to fight the French forces. Yes, the colonists did serve as well. Yes, the colonists, many of them lost their lives in the defense of the British sector. All right. However, all right, you still had a cost of the French and Indian War that went to the British, even though the British won and they have all this new territory now. There was a great cost, and the treasury needs to be rebuilt. Grog was called watered down rum. Well, grog is not nearly what India was, though. Yes, no, the India and the Asian assets, right, are the what's really cost effective, because spice. If you're hauling a ton of spice, the cost of a ton of spice is its weight in gold or more, right? You can't say that about lumber, for example. You see my point?
Well, and another thing, though, was the importations the Americans were getting, especially the southern plantation owners. They were at hoc to the British companies, and that income needed to come back in. And that starts to rise when it starts to hurt their pocketbooks, and then they start to retract some of these taxes, right?
Well, we'll get into that, all right? So let's talk about the sugar tax. Let's start with it, okay? The sugar tax. Let's read this. This is a great thing here, right? The guy starts to tax the British Isles, right? Or I mean the British colonies, right? Is aimed at ending smuggling in the sugar trade from the French and Dutch West Indies, right? And provide increased revenues to fund the enlarged British Empire. Now, this is from the Encyclopedia Britannica, folks. So I want you to understand this. Right? Protests had been received from America against the enforcement of the Molasses Act, together with a plea that the duty be set at 1 penny per gallon. In other words, why is this important? This is important because the colonies are telling people we're willing to accept the fact that Parliament has the right, to tax us. They're willing to recognize, at this point, Parliament can tax them. But the Prime Minister, George Grenville, all right, said to hell with that and put a 3-penny tax on there rather than a single penny, right? At which point, the protest began. All right, and I love this comment. This comment is awesome. Well, the protected price of British sugar actually benefited the New England distillers, though they did not appreciate it. Come on.
Well, yeah, and that's funny. We had said something about this off air. The source I got for the Sugar Act actually said that once it went into place at 3 cents a gallon, the yield of rum actually dropped by 40 to 60% out of the colonies. I don't see how that's helping.
because it didn't. All right. The reality is that the cost then became exorbitant, right? Which is why there was rioting, and why the disagreements begin. And it's important to remember that this is just the start. Okay. Then from there you go on to the Currency Act, all right, which is in that same year, 1764. Go ahead. You had the Currency Act. The Currency Act was there because the colonies were creating their own script. This is very true. In order to pay for things, right? In order to facilitate trading and movement of goods. Now, why is this good and why is this bad? Okay, it's bad because what's backing it? Okay, if every colony has its own script that it says it recognizes, and it doesn't recognize another colony's script, okay, how useful is this necessarily? All right. So the British, looking at this situation, Parliament looking at the situation, says, "Look, this is just creating chaos. You're trying to pay British subjects, back in Britain, colonial script," and they're like, "No, this is worthless. You can't come over here and say this is worth $10 because we say it isn't worth or £10 rather, because you say it's worth £10. I mean, this is just a piece of paper. How do I know this is worth £10? All right. Now, the issue here was they said, all right, you have to use approved, the monetary British monetary system. Sounds all well and good, except for the fact that gold and silver coin, which is what the monetary system was, is in short supply in the colonies. The colonies, there's no way to have enough of that script enough of the coins. There's not enough, pounds and pence and whatever else pennies of gold and silver, minted here in the colonies. And it wasn't going to happen anytime soon either. All right? Because there is no gold and silver in the colonies. So them doing that, plus the fact that you have embargoes. This is something that most people don't understand. There's embargoes on dealing with Spain and France and the Spanish and French colonies. So the doubloons and the Spanish reals that they were using in some of the southern colonies, all right, are subject to being confiscated because they're not approved anymore. And in fact, what they've been doing, when you hear the term quarter, what they're referring to actually is, in the United States, they begin cutting, all right, these coins in halves and then quarters and then eighths. That's what they're using for script. That's what they're using for payment. All right. Does that make sense, Mad Dodge?
Yeah, the kids are being loud behind me, so I'll just let you keep going.
Okay. But from the colonial standpoint, it's preventing them from trading. You got to understand this. If you have no medium of trade, money is a medium of trade, makes trade easier. Why? because I can transport one good. All right, transportation of goods goes one way, and then what's given back to you is script or coins, right, which is easily transferable. It's the mobility of wealth. Okay, this is the reason that we don't barter anymore. The reason I don't sit up there and you give me, all right, three apples and I give you 4 oranges, all right, is because I would have to carry oranges with me wherever I was trying to get apples. All right, does that make sense? All right, so in order to facilitate trade, you need some other type of medium.
Yeah, but the problem with the currency within the colonies at this time is none of it was uniform. So you couldn't necessarily trade the currencies amongst the colonies anyway.
Yeah, that's very true. All right, I'm not saying that there weren't problems with it. But if you don't have enough British script to use, telling everybody use British script when there's not enough of it, what's that going to cause? It's going to cause hyperinflation.
Yeah, and they refused to allow the colonies to produce pound sterling or any paper currency as well, right?
Right. Of course not, because the colonies would be printing their own money. I mean, you can understand. In this case, when it came to the Currency Act, you can understand it, but you also got to understand it from the perspective of the colonies. It prevented the colonies from trading, and that became an issue. It really negatively impacted colonial trade as a result. That has to be understood.
Yeah, and I was trying to find out how much sugar was involved in the in a barrel of rum. That way we can calculate how bad the tax actually was. But everything I'm finding, they're like, "There's no sugar in rum." Oh yeah, it distills out. Go fuck yourself. Sugar
well, the sugar is what's used to create the alcohol. The sugar is what's converted to alcohol. Right? During the process of distillation, that is what's converted to alcohol, is the sugar molecule breaks down into alcohol.
Oh, I know that, but that's why they're saying there's no sugar in rum. And I'm like, you guys know what I mean. Screw you, Google.
Well, anyway, I'm not there, if you want to look at it from that standpoint, technically it's molasses, but anyway.
Yeah, I was thinking sugar whiskey actually at first, so I just typed in sugar. But yeah, anyway, back to taxes and not alcohol.
All right, so then they came up with the dreaded Stamp Act. Okay. And right on the heels was the Quartering Act. So let's talk about these for a moment, right? The Stamp Act was an internal act directly levied against the colonists by the British Parliament. Now, this is the first problem, all right? This was levied strictly on the American colonists, not on anybody else, just on the colonists. Okay, do you see a problem here?
Well, yeah, and it wasn't when people think of stamps nowadays. Oh, snail mail. No, this stamp had to be affixed to every playing card, every scrap of paper, everything.
Yes, which means your marriage license, which means your deed to your house, which means, everything that was printed, all the printed newspapers, all right, which was how you got news, all right. Anything paper, on all paper documents, had to sit up there and have the Stamp Act, right? If you made a deal, like a contract, you had to get a stamp, right? Now, the colonists reacted to this and the Quartering Act. Now, you can read what the Quartering Act is, all right, in several different documents. The Quartering Act basically said that the colonies have to pay for the British troops, all right, that are stationed in the colonies. They're there to protect the colonies. Well, then the colonies should be paying for the troops that are sent by Parliament to actually handle it. Now, when I say to quarter them, right, they have to pay for the quartering. They don't have to pay the troops themselves, their salaries or anything, but they do have to pay. They're the ones who are going to have to fit the bill for, okay, where are they going to live, where are they going to stay, where the barracks is at. If they're not in a barracks and they got to stay in an inn, then you're going to have to pay the price of the inn, etc. Okay, so that's what that was about. All right. At the same time, though, if you can't find room at the inn and there's no barracks in the area, well, and also, this is something else that's important to understand. Not all the colonies were having the same problems with the Native Americans that the other colonies were. So one colony may have a lot of troops in it. Another colony may not have any troops in it. All right. For example, Rhode Island, all right, you have Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. Rhode Island has no problems with the Native Americans because, quite frankly, there's none left in the area. Do you start to see how this can affect certain groups more than others? All right. So there's that issue. There's the issue of, all right, expansion, where the colonists wanted to expand. Now, after the French and Indian War, if you remember correctly, the British tried to prevent, all right, any kind of westward expansion from by royal decree, right, into the quote unquote Indian territories. All right. Now this was obviously going to create a problem if you have troops, British troops there that are there to protect, but at the same time also prevent expansion toward the west. All right. So these became major issues, but the Stamp Act especially created a situation where you end up with Patrick Henry's speech, and you also end up with the Virginia Stamp Act resolutions. You want to go into Patrick Henry's speech there, Mad Dodge?
Yeah, just a second. Share screen. Chrome tab.
This is Patrick Henry, just to show people who he was.
Yeah, and I like the little excerpt it gives here. Caesar had his Brutus, Charles I his Cromwell, and George III. Treason, cried the speaker. Treason, treason, echoed from every part of the house. Henry faltered not for an instant, but rising to a loftier attitude, concluded thus. May profit be their example. If this be treason, make the most of it. They were giving zero fucks already, and this was 65, right? This was about 10 years before the actual war.
Well, what it created was the situation where the colonists said, okay, we tolerated Parliament taxing us before. We're not going to tolerate it now. We're the colonies. All right, we are refusing to recognize, and this is a huge thing, and this is something else that people have to understand. To tell Congress, we're not going to listen to you, okay? We're not going to sit up there and abide by this. We're just going to go on our own little frickin' way. To tell Congress, or Parliament rather, that you're not going to listen to them at all. They went bound to create the Stamp Act. Congress said, look, we're going to tax ourselves, and we're going to ignore your taxes. We are actually going to ignore it. Okay? This is now, they're talking about treason here. Treason. Well, okay, you can make the claim that it's treason, but in reality, they didn't see it that way. Now, Patrick Henry was being a bit more forceful because he was using basic language that was referring to, many people can look at and say that's referring to the king, right?
Yeah, he was comparing the king to Caesar and himself to Brutus, damn near. He was threatening the king's life, basically.
Well, right. But in reality, the fight that the Congress had in their minds was not with the king, but with Parliament. And ignoring Parliament, well, the Parliament is not the king. You have fidelity to the king, not the Parliament. Remember? Their charters are from the king. So This is one of the reasons why this sentiment is growing. Why the sentiment against we don't have to listen to Parliament. Okay, you told us that you're going to tax us. Screw you. You're levying a tax on us specifically because we're colonists, which they were. Okay, they were saying that if this is going to be the cost of this, they have to pay their fair share. I'm sure you've heard that from Bernard Sanders many times. Pay your fair share. You got to pay your fair share. Okay, well, who gets to decide that? Well, Parliament gets to decide it. And the colonists are like, no, we don't. We're no longer going to recognize your authority to directly tax us. Okay, that leads strictly then to the Declaration Act. All right, and this is the Declaration Act. Whereas several of the houses and representatives of His Majesty's colonies, plantations in America have of late, against the law, claimed themselves or to the General Assemblies of the same, the sole and exclusive right of imposing duties and taxes upon His Majesty's subjects in these said colonies and plantations, have, in pursuance to such a claim, passed certain votes, resolutions, and orders derogatory towards the legislative authority of Parliament and inconsistent with the dependency of said colonies and plantations upon the Crown of Great Britain. Be it declared that the said colonies and plantations in America have been, are, and of right ought to be subordinate unto and dependent upon the imperial crown and Parliament of Great Britain, and the King's Majesty by and with the advice and consent of the Lords, spiritual and temporal, and the Commons of Great Britain in Parliament assembled, had, I don't know what the hell that even term means here, all right, and the right ought to have full power and authority to make laws and statutes of sufficient force and validity to bind the colonies and the peoples of America, subjects of the Crown of Great Britain, in all cases whatsoever. All right?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, there's a basic argument going on here. Parliament says we have the right to tax you. You are subjects of the crown, and we have the power to levy taxes. The colonies say we have no representation. Our voices can't be heard from across the ocean. You have no authority here. I know who wins the fight, but who is actually correct? Because, Parliament does kind of have the power to levy taxes.
Well, yeah, but okay, who do I vote for in Parliament?
Since when did you have a right to vote? You didn't have a right.
The commons, the common people. If you're talking about the common subjects in Britain, how come they don't have the right to vote? How come they don't have the right for representation inside of Congress or inside of Parliament,
rather? Okay. No, and you know which side I'm actually on, but I was trying to play devil's advocate here.
And you're doing well. You did well, and that becomes the difference. Okay, one of the things that people tend to forget this is what made the British colonies in America different than, like, for example, India. Who was in India? The supposed British subjects, the way they were looking at it in India, were a people that were conquered. Okay, they weren't British subjects that came over from Britain that now live in India. Now, there were people that lived in India, yes, but percentage-wise of the population, India is populated by Indians, right? The population of Rhodesia was Rhodesians for the most part, right? Were there some farmers that came over and so forth from the British Empire? Of course, but the vast majority of the people were the indigenous populations. That's not the case in the British colonies in America, right? For a variety of reasons, not the least of which is during the colonial period, right? A series of wars and battles and you know, expulsions of the Native Americans has taken place repeatedly over time. And the fact that many of them died of disease.
Yeah, and it was the expulsion of Protestants that didn't necessarily fall in line for the reason why the first colonies were made anyway over here. They were all British citizens. They were just leaving of their own volition.
Right. But so their view of Parliament, right? Their view of whether or not I should be represented in Parliament has a different flavor to it. You understand what I'm saying? They're looking at it from the standpoint of, okay, we're no different. The colonists in America didn't look at the British Parliament, all right, with the same viewpoint. But what you're forgetting is that the monarchy was a function of the Commonwealth's spiritual life. The king, as head of the Church of England, is a godhead. He rules by divine right of the king. That is a statement, true, but that is verbiage only, especially after Parliament under Cromwell had got done frickin' saying no. Divine right is in the right of the people, right?
Well, yeah, and it's not like Thomas Jefferson, and I know we're not covering the Declaration of Independence today, but he didn't just come up with this on his own. He stole from the Magna Carta. He stole from different documents over, throughout history to put together the Declaration of Independence.
Right. So,
although there was that argument though about divine right of kings, I'm glad somebody brought it up because I didn't want to have to be that guy.
The divine right of kings, all right. I mean that's a principle that goes back for centuries after century. Right, and it is an important aspect of how the aristocracy viewed itself. Now, this creates an issue even in the United States because, quite frankly, who is there? Are our lords and nobles over here in America? No, they're not. Why? Well, do you want to go to some freaking backwoods, backwater, colony out in the middle of nowhere? All right, is that where you're going to sit up there? And is that what you want to do if you're one of the aristocracy? Of course not. You're going to live in your wonderful little landed area where you get however many pounds a year automatically from the territory and the lands that are right there. The ones that were in America though weren't along those lines.
Yeah. Okay. This is 10 years before the war. It could have been stopped at this point. Benjamin Franklin is already living in London. Why didn't they just make him a representative for the colonies and placate the colonies?
Well, each colony, you would have had to add 13 members, but they could have done it. Yeah, you could have placated the colonies at this point. All right. At this point in time, this probably could have happened. All right. But the thing is they're looking at this point now where they're both saying, hey, I'm not willing to listen to you. You have to sit up there and accept our surrogacy. And they're looking at it, some saying, no, you're going to do what we tell you. All right. You got to understand, they look at the American colonies as unimportant. Okay. The American colonies are unimportant to them. With everything else going along in the world, with everything else going on in the thing, they're unimportant, it's how they manipulate the masses. It is that, and what's more is from their standpoint, all right. How many people are they talking about? All right, the colonies. While the colonies do have people and the populations are growing in comparison to London, what is it? Boston is what? 30,000 people? The great city of Boston? New York is maybe at 40,000 at this point. Right? These are not, in comparison to the city of London, which has over 1 million people at this point, it's the entirety of the American, colonists probably don't add up or don't really come close to 1 million people.
Well, yeah, and the quintessential American feels more at home in London. Benjamin Franklin, right? he called that the best years of his life. Those 20 years he lived in London. Thanks a lot, Benny. Shit.
Well, I mean, if you're scoring every night, I mean, well, you would think that same way, wouldn't you?
You gotta feel bad for his wife and stuff, right? Like he has bounces for 20 years.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to make any commentary about Benjamin Franklin. We need to. That is something else that we need to do a story on, or an episode on each one of the founding fathers, by the way, and go over them in details and talk about their lives and so forth. But the fact that the colonists are no longer recognizing, right, the supremacy of Parliament is a demarcation point. This is a break point, right? After this, now the revolutionary fervor is going to really get kicked up, all right? And it's going to get kicked up because of things like this, right? Which is the Townsend Act, right? Which is taxes on glass, paint, lead, paper, tea, right? And the idea was they were going to try and raise 40,000 pounds a year, all right? This is what Parliament was going to do, strictly straight from the colonies.
Well, no, and the thing is, how do you make tea? You boil water and purify it, and then you make tea in it, right? You couldn't drink the water back then. It made you sick. So either you were a chronic alcoholic or you drank a shitload of tea, right?
Well, well, as long as you boil tea, you're pretty much, as long as you boil the water, you're definitely okay. But especially here in the colonies. But this created a number of things, all right, to include, all right, customs officials being surrounded. All right, they surround a sloop owned by Hancock for violations of the regulations because they called him a smuggler, which he was. Okay, at which point John Hancock got a few of his buddies together to surround the customs people and force them out onto a British warship for their lives. Basically chase them out. All right?
Yeah, and something I wanted to touch upon. Okay. Everybody thinks so. Tar and feather, that's so funny. It really isn't, guys. Okay? So they start by surrounding you. They then strip you naked in front of everybody. They then take boiling hot tar and dump it over you. So now you got like third-degree burns all over your body. And then here comes the feathers. And you're jumping around and pouncing about like a silly goose. They then usually took you out of town on a rail. So they put you on a fucking 2x4 and carried your ass out and dumped you on the outskirts of town. And did I miss anything there?
No. The stripping didn't happen all that often, but it did happen. They normally would attack people when they were when the tar and feathering took place. Generally, it was at night when people were normally sleeping, so you're getting out of bed. People had their night shirts and stuff on.
Yeah, the whole tar and feathering thing is not as funny as it sounds.
Now, you have people like John Hancock. Now, John Hancock is a prominent businessman in Boston. And, of course, he's trying to protect his assets. So what happens with this is you end up with Boston being surrounded. Right? Boston is surrounded as a result, and for lack of a better term, invaded. All right, occupied. The troops come down from Nova Scotia in several other areas and occupy Boston. Now, the people in Boston, they don't revolt yet. Okay, they're not ready for a fight. But what they do, all right, is they go into this. All right, which is they all get an agreement together, and then they get the colonies to agree on an embargo, all right, against Britain, against the home country.
Hey, there better have been a stamp on that piece of paper.
I don't know if there was a stamp on that piece of paper or not. Right?
Oh, and Brian the Observer. How did Hancock get his surname? Actually, a lot of the surnames, I know it's supposed to be a joke, but a lot of the surnames come from what people's families did in the past. So Thatcher, they were a Thatcher. I'm guessing his family probably raised roosters way back in the day. And I know you were trying to make a joke, and I ruined it on purpose. Hi, Brian.
Hey, what's up?
What a wonderful guy he is, isn't he? How's it going, Brian?
Yeah, I know I'm a wonderful guy.
No, I was talking about Mad Dodge. I was being sarcastic.
Yeah, I was ruining it. So I doubt you heard me because you were coming in here. But yeah, I totally ruined your joke and took it serious and told you how he got his surname, probably.
He probably like went to collect the chickens. He handled them and then chopped their heads off. That's probably how the surname went.
I figured his family probably raised roosters, but we're on the same page.
Yeah. I just thought it was funny.
Well, I mean, it's interesting at any rate. Hancock. That could be looked at as a part of a number of different euphemisms as well. Although I do wonder sometimes whether or not that euphemism translates that far down in history, or not euphemism, but that commentary if it would play well. Did they assign that same wording the way we do? Is that wordplay for British? How long has that wordplay been about?
Well, I mean, like blacksmith. Like Smith was probably from blacksmith and things like that.
No, that's John Hancock chopping off.
No, we're American, not Russian.
Yeah, that's pretty good. But no, I mean things like fag, right? If you talk about if you use the term fag here in the United States, it has one meaning, one traditional meaning, right? But fag in Britain is something completely different.
Yeah, it's a cigarette.
Right. Well, and before that, it was just a bundle of sticks, right? So yeah, I mean, it's just
that's a fasci.
Right. Well, that's where they got it from, right?
Yeah.
So,
the whole the whole stronger together thing. Gee, I wonder where that came from.
Well, it actually came from Rome, but that's a separate issue.
Yeah, and they used a bundle of sticks as an example.
Yeah. Well, they would also they would use those bundle of sticks to also create their rally points. So, I think it may go back to Geoffrey Chaucer. It might go back to Chaucer.
So really, like we just have to play nice when we're playing pick up sticks.
And how that works. Okay, so we have the Non-Importation Act, where basically they, like I said, the colonists they actually embargo, and the thing is that there are British interests, there are mercantile interests, all right, that are suffering as a result. Is overall Britain suffering? No, but there's several influential people in Britain that are losing money because the Americans refuse to trade with them. And this is all trade. All right? This is everything. If you take a look at this, right, what they're doing, all right, first of all was we will not send import to Great Britain on any account, all right? We will not send goods or merchandise to Britain, either on our account or on commissions. This includes, all right, or import, rather. anything except for salt, coals, fish hooks, and lines, hemp, duck bar, lead, and shot, wool cards, and wire. All right. Thirdly, we will not purchase from any factor or others any kind of goods imported from Great Britain. Right. Will not import on our own account or on commission or purchase of any shall import any from any other colony. All right, which is importing from Great Britain tea, glass, paper, or other goods commonly imported from Great Britain. In other words, the American colonies are now saying we're not going to purchase any importation of any of your goods. So all the people that are trading with America now, all right, they're seeing their bottom lines get hammered. And some of them, like I said, were very influential members inside of Parliament and inside of the government. And so they petitioned the government to say, okay, we have to stop this. We have to we got to end this.
Yeah, you know what I like though? It's funny. You can see their thinking there. They're like, well, you can import bullets.
Yeah, so there's some of those.
Well, I mean, it kind of makes sense, right? Yeah, you're allowed to import, but you're not allowed to import tea, and this becomes obviously important later on. And one of the reasons why in the United States tea is not nearly as popular in the U.S. as it is in Britain, right? And even more, the cultural mentality around tea that is still very prevalent in Britain today, right, does not take place here in the United States.
Yeah, it's a whole thing over there. It's like a snack. It's like it's not just tea. It's a snack. You get like half a sandwich and cookies.
Biscuits. No, I'm kidding.
Screw those biscuits.
Well, that's their term for them. They're the ones that came up with biscuits. I mean,
But have you ever tried tea biscuits? They're bland.
I'm not a tea drinker, so no.
I mean, if anything, I would go to war with Britain over. It would be their palate. It's a crime against food.
I like fish and chips. I don't know. That's good.
I mean, it's hard to screw that one up. Fried fish and French fries.
But the whole thing with I know. But the whole thing with tea, you have a point. Because I don't even really like tea, and I was born in in Louisiana. My mom though loves sun tea and stuff and sweet tea. In the South, you have a lot more people drinking tea, but they also had the more aristocratic attitude back then, right?
Mm-hmm. Very much so. Very much. The Southern colonists were not as they were not as ready for the revolts in many ways, because a lot of these acts affected the Northeast more drastically. Right, and there's other things that's not really talked about, right? But is rankling the North, right? The Northeast, the New England area, and things like the bans on exporting technology, for example, bans on exporting looms and loom technology. Your cookies would be bland too if you had to ship your molasses from Jamaica. That's pretty good dash. All right. So all this is going to come to a head, right? But this is in the North and the Northeast, right? Gun manufacturing, for example, gunsmiths and stuff, right? Metalworking, all right, is far more prominent in the Northeast. Obviously, the silversmiths like Paul Revere, right? They're already well known in these areas. Philadelphia has some manufacturing, but where you don't have any kind of manufacturing taking place really is down in the South. All right. But down in the South, you're having the plantations, tobacco, which was mentioned. All right, cotton is much more a thing. In the North, both areas have food production. All right, obviously, but food production is more on a subsistence more level. Right, you're not selling food. All right, they're not selling massive stores of corn, for example, over to Great Britain. That's not happening. Not that they need it, right? So the food is being consumed internally, and of course, if food is being consumed internally, what else is being consumed internally?
Well, yeah, and where you would have in the manufacturing bases like Philadelphia, Boston, stuff like that. A lot of fishing in Boston, Philadelphia had more of a manufacturing base, but you had a poorer class of people, so they were building their own furniture. They weren't importing like the Southern plantation owners. I mean, have you seen George Washington's books? That dude imported everything. Thimble, for God's sake.
Well, I mean, if you can't get it
I
manufactured,
mean,
how else you gonna do it?
he was used to the high life of being a British soldier and having a decent paycheck, and he liked the finer things.
Grew up on a plantation.
Yeah.
I mean,
Not that there's nothing wrong with that, but he'd rather pay someone to do it than do it himself. Why not?
well, he actually he would actually try to manufacture furniture. He actually tried to create a rocking chair. The stories about the number of rocking chairs that he attempted to produce and then crushed when he tried to use them that broke because he couldn't figure it out is one of the things that is well known.
Oh my God, really? Is that where they got that gag from the Patriot from?
Yes.
Oh, that's great. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I mean, and George Washington is obviously a very interesting individual for a lot of reasons. Right? He's quintessential American, right? And there's very few people. Not much manufactured in the South. What a shame! They had all those slaves with their evenings free.
We're gonna sit here, and we're gonna sit on the porch and drink some tea, and we're gonna have them boys build that for us. Yeah.
Well, now, but that does bringing that up, all right? And we're kind of making light of slavery, but I do want to make a point of something with this, right? Which is in these plantations in the South, right, early on. Right, now we're focusing on as we're getting close to the Revolutionary War, so we're not really going into the colonies and how they actually developed, right? And it's somewhat important because one of the things that had happened, many of these plantations that people are talking about, the people that are living in the colonies came from people that came over, all right, as indentured servants. Indentured servants were basically you sold yourself and your labor for numbers of years, all right, to work on somebody else's land until your term was up. And then at that point, you were free to go make a name for yourself, to go make a world for yourself. And we're not talking, okay, you have to work like an apprentice for 5 years, maybe 10. No, you're talking 20 years sometimes. And sometimes it included your entire family. 20, 30 years. No, most indentured servants never survived, all right, outside of that indentured servitude that they were under. So that's where you end up with this. I mean, you got to understand that that's how.
So they were working for a room and board, is what you're saying.
Well, they were also going to be given a certain parcel of land, all right, within the colony as it grew, right, so that they would have a stake at the end of their indentured servitude was going to be promised to them.
Yeah, a lot of times this would be, I think at the beginning it was a lot of Germans that did that, right? And then later on it would become more Irish. But when you signed yourself over to indentured servitude, you're pretty much betting that you could at least complete it before you die so your family gets the land. Because you're pretty much a slave. That's it.
Right. And land ownership, all right, was freedom. If you were going to be free, you had to own something. You had to own land. All right. Whether it was the expensive bit of land because you owned your own house or your own farm, and at that point most people were farmers. Okay, that's what made you free, right? You weren't a serf anymore. Okay, so these things are important in the mentality of the colonists and why a lot of them had the, I make it on my own, I don't need anyone else around me mentality that, quite frankly, today is so doggone rare.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
And the Northeast, they had a lot of really hardcore Protestants and Quakers and stuff, and they always had a work hard attitude. It was kind of ingrained in their religion, was it not?
Well, it fit well the way they looked at religion. It did, right? But they were very, it was very austere in a certain manner. Right? Austerity was also a part of that. What's that word? I'm trying to say it. I can see it. I can do it. The opulent lifestyle that you see from the southern plantation owners, all right, is something that is very overly shunned upon, all right, by the Northeast. To live in that opulent life is not something that the Northerners in the Northeast, the New England, I should say, the New England colonies really, really looked down upon that. They really had a viewpoint of, well, you guys are just those plantation owners. You're living a hedonistic lifestyle. That's how many of them looked at it.
Well, I want to address that here in a second, but the chat, they don't have to lose their entire lives unless they got into legal trouble. You are correct. It was usually 7 to 15 years, depending on if you had some money to pay for your journey over. So that is true. Then again, they did send prisoners just with pretty much indentured servitude. You weren't going to get no land or anything. You were pretty much a slave. But in the South, the plantation owners didn't have it all rosy either.
I mean, a lot of it, I mean, you could...
Go for it, Brian. Go ahead.
No. If you think about it, it's kind of like almost like a retirement plan, like today. Like you work for X amount of years, and then at the end of it, you get this fat check, when you do like retirement age and your severance package and everything, and you could live off of that for the rest of your life. But in this regard, you're getting land. I mean, for the whole time you're in servitude, you're getting room and board, and then at the end of it, you actually get a plot of land, and you get I don't know how much money or whatever, but that's what you got.
But a lot of people, when they got here, found out that
you got something.
But they would also get their time extended a lot because, okay, so you got sick and you had to pay for the local apothecary to get you something. A lot of times that was added to the number of times or the amount of time that you'd have to stay in servitude. So there were negatives that applied to that as well.
And when it came to the plantation owners, they usually hired an overseer to deal with, well, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, the slaves. But they also, think about running a Fortune 500 company nowadays. That's pretty much what they were doing. Because you had to rotate the crops, there was a lot of work involved in owning a plantation. It wasn't like they just sat on their ass and drank lemonade all day.
Well, that's true. I mean, if you're going to make it work, I mean, when it came right down to it, even George Washington's plantation was never really viable in and of itself. It was never self-sufficient.
neither was Monticello, right? That was partially because Jefferson kept building. Like,
Well, Jefferson was his own worst enemy in a lot of ways.
Brian, we
Well, I
had
mean,
covered. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say Jefferson had, he had a good relationship with his slaves, a very friendly one. But go on, Dodge.
Yeah, we had covered the tax issues earlier. I know you weren't in the chat yet, I don't think. And that's pretty much what we're covering today. We've hit the hour mark, but at this point, 10 years before the war, it could have been reconciled. Let's say your parliament. Would you have allowed the colonies to send representation over? Or would you have dug your heels in like they did?
Well, their fear, okay, is this. Okay, understand this. Once again, the population of the American colonies is not, if you take a look at the population of all their colonial assets, is minor, is small potatoes. Okay. So they're looking at it is, well, if we let just these few here gain representation, they're going to swamp us. Remember, all right, they're treating the colonies not as if they're the same as the British subjects on the mainland. They're looking when I mean the British Isles. They're looking at the colonists as colonists. They're looking at the colonists as colonies, and they're not seeing a difference between them and, for example, the Indian colonies. If India gets proportional representation, they're done. Okay? Then all of a sudden, who's in Parliament? Who's running Parliament? Let's be honest. If you get proportional representation to India, to the Indian subcontinent, then what colonists do what does Parliament look like? It looks Indian. It doesn't look British. Because if you look at it from that perspective, right? So they're looking at it from that's the perspective that they're looking at. They're not looking at the American colonies as if they're anything more, all right, than a colony like in India. However, that becomes a problem in and of itself because the Americans, all right, the American colonies, are looking at themselves as we are exactly the same as every subject in Britain that has representation in Parliament. So, would you have done it? Could they have done it? Yes, they could have done it, but they would have had to have created it as okay, we get to assign how many representatives you're allowed to send, and what your voting base would be.
It would probably turn out. I mean, I don't know. I think the revolution we had here probably gave Britain a reason to deal with other areas differently. Like, let's look at Canada. They are a commonwealth under the crown, right?
No, that's true. They did become a commonwealth.
Yeah. So, but they have they're not subject to the laws of Great Britain for the most part, but I think some of the tax money goes to Great Britain.
Well, they recognize that the Queen is the sovereign head. Yeah,
the Queen as a sovereign head. Same can be said with other nations like New Zealand, Australia. Actually, I don't know about Australia, but I know New Zealand is. And then much like how we have our territorial claims to, say, Puerto Rico and some of the Virgin Islands and other places, we have them set up as Commonwealth. And, of course, they have their own governors and their own whatever. But, of course, they pay taxes to us and then they get federal assistance or whatever. So they still get a lot of the benefits from the United States. They don't really get. But the thing is, they don't have any congressmen or senators that go towards the United States, though, which is also another thing. We're not giving them that sort of legislation representation, much like Great Britain doesn't give their commonwealths representation either in Parliament.
But they're not subject to certain things like federal taxes either.
No. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But I think it was a lesson in there's a way to get some sort of money or some sort of like whatever from these commonwealths, but it didn't have to do with like charging each individual person like a sales tax or a income tax that goes directly to Great Britain, which is what they were kind of doing with the Stamp Act. What they were doing with the Stamp Act was a sales tax or an import tax, I should say.
Yeah, but we were importing them from you were importing them from Great Britain. We're going to tax you on what we're giving you.
Yeah, it's like, wait a minute, we're an extension of your own country. I mean, yeah. I mean, they could have solved that very easily. They could have said, okay, well, maybe give us a cut of sales or something like that. But no, they wanted taxes upon imports, upon importation. They didn't work out a deal with anybody.
Well, I mean, it was
They just said, nope, we're doing it, and tough because we're a monarchy, and you're going to deal with it.
Well, the British Empire, especially this Parliament at this point, wants to have more direct. The other thing that we don't talk about is Parliament's idea is to try and gain more hands-on administrative control of what the colonists are doing. You can't let the colonies do whatever they want, all right? Because it's creating other problems for them. For example, with the Native Americans, the British are going in there. They're making deals with the Native American tribes, and the British colonists are violating those deals, for example, right? It's just a small example. But that also applies to they're violating the deals with France. They're violating the deals with Spain. The Americans are acting pretty uppity when it comes right down to it. They're acting independent. All right, so they need to be brought into control. All right, I mean, for the most part, they're not too unruly yet. They'll get there very quickly, but they're not too unruly. But it's building. The independence movement is building, and the first big throw was the Stamp Act, because the Stamp Act is what's caused the colonists to say, "Okay, enough's enough. You don't have the right to tax us." All right. That mentality, all right, is a breaking point. At that point, you've got to try and figure out a way to try and resolve that. Because if the attitude is that they don't recognize the supremacy of Parliament, you have a problem. That's believe it or not, that's rebellion. That is a rebellion. So, anyway, sorry.
Oh, no, it's fine. All right. I think we pretty much covered it, huh?
I think we're at the point where we're ready to go
into... Did you talk about the Townshend Revenue Act? Yeah.
Yeah, I did.
So next week is the Boston Massacre. Well, the Boston almost massacre. I mean, come on, really? We'll talk about it.
We'll talk about it for that anyway. You could say it was a massacre. I mean, it was a riot that was suppressed, right? But they suppressed it better than they did the Portland riots.
Ouch! Oh, as a side note, because you brought that up, in Springfield, Oregon, the Black Lives Matter guys decided to take it down there into the residential zone. And then the house is emptied with a bunch of people with guns, because Oregon's open carry, and American flags. And they ran them out of their neighborhood. And as they were driving out, they were taking pictures of all of their license plates. That was great. And then I saw a video earlier in the day. They were clashing with police, and this chick grabs the cop's nightstick and tries to wrestle it out of his hand. And he yanks it back, and he fucking laid her out with one punch. Bing!
Oh, he just punched her?
Yeah, he leveled her. Oh, fucking hell. Don't mess with that guy's nightstick.
Well, you're trying to take a policeman's weapon. She's lucky.
Oh, I saw this other one where a dude was trying to take a female cop's tear gas gun, like put his hand on it, and she just and he's trying to grab it, and she just decked him.
Well, yeah, you can't take
saw
weapons.
that today,
don't
too.
try to take the cops' weapons. That's always a mistake.
Yeah.
Trying to take the officer's weapon is never going to end well.
Yeah,
It will never end well.
Well, no, and one last thing that happened.
Don't want it to end in a Wendy's parking lot in Georgia.
Oh, yeah. But in Springfield, one other thing happened. Okay, I didn't see what the dude did, but they were clashing right at the roadblock. And then suddenly the cop grabbed him by his feet and drag him behind the cop line and proceed to bash his head into the fucking pavement like 10 punches, and you can see him bouncing his head off of the fucking street. Like, okay, you can get away with shit in Portland, but guys, don't pull that shit in Springfield. These cops deal with tweakers all day and all night. They're not putting up with your bullshit.
Well, Springfield is right outside of Eugene, though, right?
Yeah, they run right into each other and kind of blend. Yeah.
So, I mean, they're probably thinking, these college kids are probably thinking it's just like Eugene, where they can do whatever the hell they want. So.
Portland sucks. Don't move to Portland, Moondog. But Oregon is actually not bad. There's other places in Oregon where there's sane people. But yeah,
sane people do not elect Wheeler and do not elect your governor, Katie Brown. I'm sorry, Bad Dog.
Look at the election map. The place where I live didn't elect her either. It's Portland and Eugene.
Well, you better start fixing that problem.
But you're right with the whole Eugene thing, because the civilians that emptied the houses were yelling at Black Lives Matter. They're like, "Go back to Eugene! Get the fuck out of here!" It was just great, and I don't know why we ended this show on that note. Oh, the riot thing because the Boston Massacre. Yeah, next week is the Boston Massacre. We'll cover that. Should we just go in depth on that? I mean,
yeah,
we can talk about the propaganda that came out all around it, Sons of Liberty, and all that good stuff.
I think that's necessary. I support Greater Idaho, the Greater Idaho movement.
Yeah, me too. I'm with you on that one. All right. Thank you, Brian, for joining there at the end, and you're welcome to join us next week. We do it at 3 on the West Coast. So
okay, cool.
Yeah. You wanna tell everybody your channel and shill for a second or no?
Sure. Brian the Observer. At youtube.com/Brian BRION the Observer. I talk about all types of things. I even talked about sometimes pop culture and entertainment, but I haven't talked about that throughout the duration of 2020 for the most part because, well, you know why. And like Dodge here, I have the balls that a lot of these other channels don't. We'll talk about things that matter, things that are going on, because other media corporations are going to be same media corporations, and no matter how much you want them to change your canon back the way you want it to, they don't care about you. So just drop that.
All right, thank you, Brian, and everybody. You all know MC. You doing your morning show tomorrow, MC?
Yep, doing the morning show tomorrow. Although there's going to be a day next week that I'm not going to be able to do the show at the normal time. I'll have to change the time because work will intrude.
Are you going to be talking about aliens, MC?
No, I am not going to be talking about freaking aliens. He's talking specifically about a news story, and I'm not going to be talking about that news story.
You're gonna make me do it. Fine. I'll take one for the team.
This is part of the Mad Dodge Red Eye. That's perfect for the Red Eye, and you know it.
Yep, we're covering aliens tomorrow. That's it. Get your tinfoil hats out. Get your best Alex Jones impression ready.
Turn the frogs gay.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. We did digress there at the end, but it's okay. You know what this is. Good night, good luck, and don't go to France.